Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to a special Recruiting Tuesdays edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle, where we tell it like it is. Friends, Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion that is posted Tuesdays in the off-season and twice during the regular season. The huddle features WeAreSC columnists, staff writers, and historians. We first start off with the pregame show, where we introduce our panel members for this edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, and then give you the latest USC Trojans football news. First, let's meet Tuesday's panelists, a WeAreSC columnist who writes WeAreSC.com's The Monday Morass, Yay or Nay, and Sunday Takeaways, in addition to regular season football and basketball reports. He also hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked On USC. That's Marc Kulkin. The editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com, columnist, national recruiting guru, and a graduate of USC, that's Erik McKinney. And a former William Jewell College defensive back and WeAreSC columnist who writes the popular WeAreSC.com column Musings with Arledge and his own weekly WeAreSC.com solo video show, Musings with Arledge, and is a graduate of the USC Law School, that's Chris Arledge. And a weekly WeAreSC columnist who writes Fridays The Obvious Not So Obvious, IMHO Sunday, and is an active member of the Football Writers Association of America, your moderator and producer of Inside the Trojans Huddle. That's me, Greg Katz. Before we kick off this edition of WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle, here's an update and some USC football news. The Trojans resumed spring football practice Tuesday, and now will go 3 times a week the rest of the way through March and into mid-April, concluding with the spring game on Saturday, April 15th at the Coliseum at noon. Over the weekend, the Trojans hosted an impressive group of high-value national and local recruits for the football class of 2024 and beyond. And it was announced earlier that the highly anticipated 2024 USC LSU football game in Las Vegas, billed as the Vegas Kickoff Classic on Sunday, September 1st, will literally kick off at 4:30 Pacific time. A calendar reminder that Vegas Kickoff Classic will be during the Labor Day weekend, and it will be the debut, in reality, of USC representing the Big Ten against an SEC team. Friends, WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle greatly appreciate your viewership and visitorship. We encourage those of you watching on sites like YouTube, click on the red subscriber and like buttons. It's greatly valued. It's free. And you can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. And a reminder that WeAreSC.com is offering a spring ball subscription special. You can get all the WeAreSC premium content for just $29.99 up to August 31st, 2023, or 4 months for just $10. All right, let's kick this thing off. Today's Huddle edition is a special retrospect recruiting edition. By position, we'll be doing the following. We'll be naming, each panelist will be naming their 3 recruits or transfers that lived up to the hype in their career in terms of recruiting. Also, naming a recruit transfer for that position whose recruiting at that position was under hype, but that player was a successful and surprising success at USC during their football career. And perhaps the most controversial and perhaps sensitive, naming one recruit transfer that never lived up to the recruiting hype. Again, we're doing it by position. In your answers panel, give the names and a brief comment if you wish. Pardon me. We'll start the first half with the offense. In the second half, we'll address the defense. And in between at halftime, we'll go over the place-kicking punter recruiting. So now that we know the ground rules, let's get going here. Panel, in your lifetime of following USC football, name the top 3 quarterback recruits, high schooler transfers, in order, that lived up to their recruiting hype, then one underhyped recruit that surprised you, and one recruit, we're talking about quarterbacks now, that never lived up to the hype. All right, Marc Kulkin, I know you're ready to go, so have at it.
Yeah, so I'm not even sure what year recruit rankings started. So I'm just going to name my top 3 quarterbacks that I think were pretty highly ranked in the recruiting era. Carson Palmer, Matt Leinart, Matt Barkley. I think Leinart and Palmer speak for themselves. And Matt Barkley, I threw in there just, he lived up to the expectations considering his circumstances that he played under at USC. And then who never lived up to the hype. I'm going to go Jason Thomas. Should have played tight end.
Wow, that's a good one.
And then surprise, I don't know. I don't have one. Sorry.
That's all right. All right. So those are your 5. All right, let's go on to Chris Arledge.
So I'm going to offer one who was highly billed and lived up to the hype. He's already named a few that would be on most lists. Caleb Williams. Who was more hyped than Caleb Williams, and who lived up to the hype more than Caleb Williams? I mean, the guy is national news before he sets foot on campus. He's hanging out with rappers at the football game. There's all kinds of talk in the media about how awful it is or how amazing it is. And then he went out and played better than anybody could have expected. So he's the one. Under the radar recruit that played well. How about Keaton Slovis? Right. I don't think anybody really expected a ton from him. He was a 3-star recruit. He was not somebody that everybody was talking a lot about. But this is a kid who played really well as a freshman. He's a Pac-12 freshman of the year. He was all Pac-12 first team as a sophomore. He was a good player, and a surprisingly good player considering his recruiting rating. So I liked the Jason Thomas pick. There's an obvious one that I'm going to leave out because I suspect that you guys are going to do it. I'm going to go with the controversial one. I think Todd Marinovich never lived up to the hype. Very few people had as much hype as Todd Marinovich coming out of high school. I mean, it was the whole Robo QB thing. He was, he was a 5-star plus recruit. And as a redshirt freshman, he played because Pat O'Hara got injured. He had gotten beat out in training camp. And he played pretty well as a redshirt freshman, right? He was all Pac. He was an all Pac-10 kid. They win the Rose Bowl. He played pretty well. His sophomore year, he didn't play well at all, and then completely flamed out, fighting with the coach on the sideline, having substance abuse problems behind the scenes. I mean, this is a guy who is expected to have the sort of career that maybe not Matt Leinart had, because that's too much to expect of anybody. But he was supposed to be a guy who was going to be there for a long time and be a superstar for a long time. He had one good year, one disastrous year, and he was gone. So I'm going to go with Marinovich as a guy who did not live up to the hype.
It's a great call.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Well, we're privileged to have a former ESPN recruiting guru for a number of years, who's our editor-in-chief here at WeAreSC.com. Erik McKinney, can't wait to hear what your choices are. Go right ahead.
Yeah, let me tell you, going third on this is garbage. It is absolute garbage, especially because the Venn diagram of guys that I can talk about is fully covered by everyone who went in front of me. So Caleb Williams is my number one. He didn't win, he hasn't yet won a national championship like Matt Leinart, but what breaks it for me is the coverage that Caleb Williams got and the hype that was around him. I know Matt Leinart was a big time recruit. Carson Palmer's in that mix. Matt Barkley's in that mix. Nothing in terms of media spotlight and attention compares to what Caleb Williams got. So those are the 4 guys for me that I just mentioned. Caleb Williams is number 1. Keaton Slovis was my surprise. I think when he came in, I don't think anybody expected a ton from him. Because we hit on him a little bit. Cody Kessler, I think, is another name. He came in with Max Wittek, and the thought early on, at least in their recruitment, was Max Wittek was the guy. And then if you needed a second one, Cody Kessler. I think by the time they signed and that class was over, Kessler had pretty significantly made up that ground, and I think was actually ranked higher than Wittek in at least one service. For me, I think the disappointment, I'd say Mitch Mustaine. I think when he came over, I know you said we can go with transfers too. Thoughts that he was a big time guy. USC fans got to see a little bit of what he could do when USC played Arkansas and he came in as a true freshman and kind of, I mean, that game was horrible for Arkansas fans, but provided a little spark, and there was a thought that maybe he could be the guy, and just, I mean, certainly not on that list of the other guys we mentioned there at quarterback for USC.
Oh, that was a good list, and I don't know if I would call this Venn diagram a pieces of garbage, but
No, going third after they mentioned all the
stop it,
my guys.
McKinney, you're better than that. You're the freaking editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com. We expect big things from you at all times. All right, I will pick Matt Leinart, Santa Ana, California, Modern Day High School. That was my number one guy. Number two, Carson Palmer, Laguna Niguel, California, Santa Margarita Catholic High School. And of course, Palmer ended up living up to it when he got Norm Chow as his offensive coordinator and won the Heisman Trophy, and as did Matt Leinart, of course. But number three, I agree with, I think Erik said this, and I think, now correct me if I'm wrong, I think Chris said the same thing. I put Caleb Williams in there. I really didn't want to have transfers in this, but we're in the era of transfers, and I said, you know what, you can't, they go hand in hand now. So I put Caleb Williams for all the reasons that Erik said. He was 100% spot on, from Washington, D.C., Gonzaga College. I never understood why they would call a high school college, but it's Gonzaga College. But I can't recall a transfer having this much hype, no matter who or what era it was. I mean, this was just over the top, and he wins the Heisman Trophy. He's got to be part of the list.
Hey, wait a minute, for all the reasons that Mark said, what about the reasons I gave? Were my reasons no good, Greg? I don't understand.
I mean,
you said you pointed out that we both mentioned his name, and then you said for all the reasons that Mark said. Like, what's that all about?
I didn't even mention Caleb Williams, so don't drag me into this little tete-a-tete.
It's not your fault. I know that, Mark. It's not you. The disrespect is coming.
Oh, don't defend him, Arledge. Come on. He's a big boy. He can defend himself.
Well, that's fine.
Before I was so rudely interrupted by someone who I expect would rudely interrupt me, of course. I actually put Tim Green from El Camino JC as a surprise quarterback transfer recruit. You don't hear his name much, but he did lead the Trojans into the Rose Bowl. And
we heard it last week. I said it.
Then why didn't you say it this week, smarty pants?
Okay. Well, I mean, I had Keaton.
Okay, you gave it a good.
People don't like that. What you just did, people don't like.
What? You don't know that. Of course, now I get a million hits on.
Yeah, you're gonna hear about it.
I know you're the chosen one. I know that people have pictures of you above their Trojan trophy case. I know that.
Are we still on quarterback?
I don't know what we're doing.
Hey, who woke up? For San Clemente?
Hey, who woke up Erik? Did Erik fall asleep for a minute? No, I'm gonna go also, by the way, a quarterback transfer that never lived up to the hype. I put Mitch Mustaine too. Actually, coming out of high school, I think he was the USA Today Player of the Year, if I recall. And he got a lot of hype when he came here. Does anybody here, just as a trivia question, remember who was his receiving partner at Springdale High School that came to SC and did a really good job?
Damian Williams.
Very good. Well done.
By the way, I was trying to be nice to Erik since he was going third, and I left Max Brown off of my did not live up to the hype list. I thought that was the easy one, and I took on the challenge of Todd Marinovich. So, but nobody mentioned him.
Well, you know what? This is true. I say this. I actually had Max Brown on there, and then I said to myself, well, he was the Gatorade Player of the Year. He got a shot to play. Mitch Mustaine never really did much of anything when he was at SC. So I felt that based on that criteria, I was going to put him in.
Receiver caught the ball.
What's that?
He would have beaten Notre Dame if the receiver caught the ball.
That's a true statement there.
Okay, Mark. Who would have caught the ball?
The receiver.
I know who was the receiver.
Donald Johnson.
Okay, what pass pattern did he run?
Erik.
Max Brown's the guy there, though. That was.
Oh, don't bail him out, McKinney.
I'm just saying that's the answer.
Max Brown was a layup, and that's why I left it for you, Erik. But it was either an out and up or a hitch and go or something.
He was in the rain.
It was down and in. It was a slant.
No,
I was actually standing on the sidelines when he dropped it. I couldn't.
40 yards. What kind of slant is it when he's 40 yards downfield?
Well, he ran down about 20 yards and he cut inside.
All right.
All right. Well, you're going to give me a break here. Okay. Panel, in your lifetime of following USC football, name your top 3 running back recruits in order, high school or transfers. All right. Again, the 3 that you picked, 1 surprise recruit and 1 overrated or failed recruit. All right, Mark, who do you got?
So again, and I don't even know if number 2 and 3 on the list were had recruiting rankings. Greg, you might know, you've been around since Methuselah. So I'm going to go Reggie Bush, Charles White, Marcus Allen. Did they have recruiting rankings for those 2, 2 and 3?
They just point of information. You make up a good point. By the way, Methuselah I had over for dinner the other night. They had All-America teams. The ones that people looked at basically was the Parade All-America team. That's the one that most people did before. Joe Terranova had his recruiting report out of Detroit. But in today's world, it really wasn't what it is then, way it is now. But go ahead.
I go back as far as the Long Beach Press Telegram Parade All-America team.
That's right. The best in the West. That's right.
Right. So again, not sure about their recruiting rankings. That's why I threw those as the top 3. And I think their names speak for themselves.
Sure.
Surprise transfer. I threw Justin Fargas in there just because of what he battled back to do. And then never lived up to the hype. I had a really tough time with this one. And again, it's because he came in with that injury, but Mark Tyler.
Okay. We can go with that if you wish. Arledge.
That's tough. That's a tough shot right there from Kulkin. Mark Tyler had a decent career. Okay, that's fine. The names that he gave as the guys that lived up to that, don't look at me like that. The names that he gave that lived up to the hype were all fine. I mean, Reggie Bush was at the top of my list. He was. I don't know that I've seen more than 2 or 3 recruiting videos, highlight videos that were in the same class as Reggie's. I mean, you watch that video and you thought this guy's going to be amazing. Turns out he was. Didn't live up to the hype. There's a layup here, and I'm going to leave it alone so that McKinney can do it. And I'm going to go back to the 1980s. I'm going to go with Ryan Knight, who was a big-time recruit. I mean, big time. And never really did much at USC. He started for a year or 2. Didn't seem to have the speed that they needed to play at that position. And so I'm going to go with Ryan Knight. Unheralded but great, Sonny Bird. How could it be anybody other than Sonny Bird?
There was a lot of layups at the running back position, by the way, Chris. A lot of layups.
I'm you know what? I think McKinney is going to pick the layup that I left for him. We'll see, but I think he is.
Well, let's find out right now. Eric,
this is the worst.
Oh,
I hope there's just nobody and he's throwing stuff out. Okay, so Reggie Bush is number 1. I mean, clearly. Lendell White for me, he was a big time recruit too, that USC guy. And then I'm going to say Ronald Jones as number 3. The guy's number 5 all time at USC in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. He was a big time get over Notre Dame out of Texas. My surprise is Curtis McNeil, how much he ended up contributing and being a solid back. He ended his career more rushing yards than Alan Bradford, Stephon Johnson, CJ Gable, other running backs that came in kind of around that time. And then the guy for me, being from San Diego, is Dylan Baxter. That came in and kind of flashed. And I remember a lot of people, we were with ESPN at the time, and ESPN did not have him ranked as highly as a lot of the other services did. And the guys who put those lists together heard a lot from USC fans. And they kind of said, oh, there's questions here with speed and, some of this sort of stuff. But no, everybody had huge expectations for him. I remember USC, it was not something that they did at that time. Now you see highlight clips from practice and all that stuff everywhere. That's a staple of every program now. That's not something that happened back then. And they put out that run that he had during a practice. And that was kind of one of the first sort of viral marketing things that a college football program did. And that was him as a true freshman. So USC leaned into it a little bit, and then not a whole lot from him on the field.
I mean,
Hey, by the way, that was the layup, and I knew Erik would get it. But when Dylan Baxter, I mean, he transferred, I think, to San Diego State or someplace like that, and then he transferred again. His last school was William Jewell College rival Baker College in Kansas.
How could he do such a thing?
Well, I don't know.
I was going to get that right. I thought Greg would throw that out as a question, considering quizmaster.
Yeah,
in this one.
Baker College, and so I didn't care for him much before he went to Baker, and then I didn't care for him much when he did go to Baker. But
Who knew? Who knew?
Yeah. Well, I do. I knew. You know who else knows? I bet Dan Lanning knows.
Okay.
He's another William Joe Cardinal. Of course he knows.
We all know that. We all had a football card of him sometime.
Another 5-star. Wasn't DJ Shoemate a 5-star?
That.
Yeah.
Oh, there's another good one. Well,
That's a good one.
There's a
maybe
lot.
he's going to be down the line somewhere. All right, I'm going to go with Reggie Bush, number one. I'm giving the high school and where they're from because I think that's kind of gives a little background. So he's from Spring Valley, California, Helix High School. Number two, because we're allowing transfers, you guys wouldn't know this, and understandably so, but O.J. Simpson, for me, he became, in those days, like a really curious recruit. It started real small in little agate print in the Times that this incredible tailback from San Francisco, City College of San Francisco and Galileo High School was coming to SC. And actually for spring practice, when he showed up, there was a lot of people to watch him. And I think it was after the first actual hitting that there was some talk of Simpson going to wide receiver. But McKay said after watching him in the first series of the way he attacked the line of scrimmage, he said, he's the starter. He's it. He's the real deal. And of course, he did become that. My third one was Charles White, who played fullback in the Wishbone at San Fernando High School in San Fernando, California. I thought he was definitely got hyped. Part of it also was his track ability, but he was great. My surprise transfer recruit, and some of the ones that you guys picked were really outstanding selections. I decided on Ricky Irvins from Pasadena, California, Muir High School. He was really good. I saw him in high school, but he didn't get the acclaim that I think he should have. But then eventually, because he was coming in during the era that was still fresh in the mind of all the All-America tailbacks that SC had. And it really was unfair to a lot of tailbacks that followed that group of Heisman Trophy winners and such. But he was really good. Now, I am actually kind of pleased with my pick. In fact, I'm disappointed that I could not mention just one running back that was a major disappointment. But here's my two, because I thought Ty, I had to take this Ty. One, Ty Isaac from Sherwood, Illinois, Joliet Catholic, came in with a big reputation and never lived up to the hype, then transferred out. But the one that probably is the great trivia question, only people like old farts like myself would remember, was a man called Paul Rice. Paul Rice came in the early 70s. He was out of Louisville, Texas, Louisville High School. So he comes to SC in spring, and he's considered the best running back in Texas, one of the top three in the country. And in the first series of plays against a big time program, when SC is really, in the wheelhouse of talent for the most part, he goes into the line of scrimmage and they just splatter his nose all over his helmet. Paul Rice comes off the field bleeding, doesn't know what to do with himself, knocked into yesterday. The next day, he gets in his car or plane and goes home, and we never see him again. Ended up playing at SMU. But Paul Rice, the legend that never was in college. Amazing story. All right, let's move on here to using our same format. Let's go to wide receivers. Mark, who's your five?
Yeah, this one, man.
This was a hard one, by the way, I thought.
A little difficult. So I'm just going to put my top three, and really in no particular order. Robert Woods, Keyshawn, BMW, and then the surprise. I actually and only because Chris mentioned it and it made it a tie. Drake London wasn't as highly acclaimed as the other guys. So I had him there initially, but then Chris got smart and threw out Damian Williams' name, so I made it a tie. And then I actually had 2 ties in this category. The guys who never turned into what they should have been, Stanley Guinness and George Farmer.
Wow. That's those are 2 excellent selections in my opinion. Chris, what do you got?
So I actually didn't think this was a hard category at all. I thought I dominated this category. And if it comes to the guys who lived up to the hype, I was going to go Robert Woods as my number 1. Everybody thought he was going to be fantastic. He was. And since I'm only giving 1 in all these categories, breaking the rules, I'm going to stick with him. But unheralded and great, Big Mike Williams. Mike Williams was a 3-star recruit, and some of the Florida schools wanted him to be a defensive end. Nobody, I don't think, I mean, Pete Carroll may have seen what he could become, but I think most people didn't realize that Mike Williams was going to become the best receiver in college football, and that's what he turned into. On the don't live up to the hype list, there are a ton of names here, actually. And 2 of those names on my list, Mark just mentioned. And there's one that's a layup, and I'm going to leave it alone so Eric doesn't have to whine about going third. And I know he's going to pick this name, so I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going to go with, how about this? How about Kyle Prater, a 5-star plus recruit, a big kid, I think out of Illinois. He was supposed to be a superstar. If he ever caught a pass at USC, I don't remember it. So I'm going to go with Kyle Prater.
Excellent. Good choice. All right. Well, Eric, the door was thrown open to you by Mr. Arledge. What do you have?
All right. So yeah, Robert Woods is my number 1. Dwayne Jarrett is my number 2. I feel like he gets overlooked a little bit in terms of when you talk about great USC receivers, but I think he absolutely belongs up there. He was a touchdown machine at USC. I had Keyshawn Johnson as my number 3 on that. I honestly was too young to remember like all the recruiting process of him and that kind of thing. But I'm not going to talk about USC wide receivers and not mention Keyshawn Johnson. I had a tie after that. Marquise Lee, Juju, Michael Pittman, Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those guys are all tied for me. Mike Williams was not mentioned there because, yes, he's the surprise. Chris was right there. The layup underperformer is Whitney Lewis. The other guy that is kind of interesting for the underperformer for me is Patrick Turner, just because he's still listed when you look at kind of the all-time USC recruits. We're talking about number 1 overall guys, number 2 overall guys. He's up there. He's up there as a number 1, number 2, number 3. He's somewhere there. He was ranked when he came to USC. Now he finished his career. He's top 25 at USC all time in receiving yards. So it's not like he did nothing, but when you think about that line of big receivers that USC had, he's just not in that mix. But no, Whitney Lewis is the finger roll lay-in of the big time wide receiver recruits that didn't do anything at USC.
By the way, on the Patrick Turner thing, because he was also my short list, he made my short list not only because he didn't become the superstar everybody expected him to be, but because of his drop against Stanford in that 40-point favorite horrible loss, right? Pete Carroll's worst loss ever. Patrick Turner had his hands on the ball. If he catches that pass at the end of the game, USC has a shot at what was probably going to be a 35, 40-yard field goal to avoid that upset, and he dropped it. So that puts him on the list.
Eric, did Ray hit him? Did Ray hit Turner before that Stanford game or after that Stanford game in practice?
I think he went into that after the hit. Chris, Kyle Prater, 1 catch, 6 yards at USC. So you did forget it.
Yeah.
I don't think he did.
It sounded like a good one, though. I wonder if he got a first down off of that. Was it like a 3rd and 5 play, you think?
Had to be, right? Had to be clutch.
There's another one on the list. I'm not going to say it because I think Greg will come through, but there's another one that
Putting
absolutely.
pressure on me.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg, say it. This is not as big a.
I don't think I'm going to say what you think I'm going to say, honestly.
Okay. All right, well, let's see.
All right, well, I guess that's the segue to me. All right, I had Keyshawn Johnson from LA, out of West LA Community College. I actually had Mike Williams #2, and I realized he was a 3-star out of Plant High School in Tampa, Florida. But once the word got out that Norm Chow was involved in his recruiting, and knowing that the Southeastern Conference schools were after him, it kind of picked up, and it kind of got on my radar enough that I felt comfortable putting him on this list. Obviously, Robert Woods could be higher of the three, maybe #1 out of Carson, California, Sarah High School. My surprise wide receiver recruit actually is Marquise Lee from Inglewood, California, Sarah High School. I don't think anybody realized, because I think some people thought he'd be a defensive back or what have you, and he just turned out to be an incredible receiver. Arguably, maybe for at least one season, the best receiver SC's ever had. My #5 choice here was who never lived up to the hype. This was a no-brainer to me. The ones that some of you brought up were excellent choices, but for me, I just could not get over the unfortunate outcome for Whitney Lewis, Oxnard, California, St. Bonaventure. Was there ever a more hyped player than Whitney Lewis? And, you know, when we are talking about guys that didn't live up to the hype, we're not talking about them as a person. We're not ripping on them. We're not bagging on them. We're just telling the way we think. And Whitney Lewis, he obviously had some issues going on. He transferred. I can't even remember where I don't know if it was in some place.
Northern Iowa.
I mean,
He didn't do much there either, I don't think.
No, and it really, I actually had some compassion for him, that you could be that nationally hyped and just disappear forever and a day. So really unfortunate, but that was my pick. Chris, who did I not pick that you thought I was going to pick?
Nobody mentioned Vidal Hazelton, who was a monster 5-star recruit, and
yeah, Penn State wanted him, right? Penn State was really after him.
I mean, yes, I mean everybody wanted him, and there was some drama around him.
Thought he was a 6-star.
What did you say, Mark?
His dad thought he was more than a 5-star.
Yeah.
I think his dad thought he was a 7-star, if I remember. I might be wrong on that.
That was more of Vidal's issue than anything at USC.
There you heard it.
He had a 50 catch year. He did something. I had him kind of borderline on that, but wanted to list more hits than misses, I think. But yeah, Greg, you're talking about when you talk about guys who miss, there's so much that goes into it. There's injuries, there's stuff where it's just bad situations, there's coaching, there's all of that kind of stuff. It's definitely not bagging on guys.
Absolutely. All right. Let's move on to the tight ends. Mark, what do you got?
Great question. So Fred Davis is at the top of the list for, as far as top 3. You win the award, you go straight to the top. Now, I know he wasn't necessarily a tight end coming out of high school, but I think that's where they had him pegged. As much as other people had BMW as a tight end, if they were going to recruit him, USC wanted Mike Williams as a wide receiver, and I think it worked out the same. As far as the other top guys behind him, recruit rankings, Eric, maybe you can help me out on this one. I really didn't follow tight end recruiting.
I don't have any to spare. I got to use my 3.
Then whatever Eric said, that's who I would have picked too. As far as never lived up to the hype, I want to throw Josh Follow in there just because he showed us what he could do, and it just never gave us enough of it. And I know he had some injuries during his 6-year career at USC, but it wasn't necessarily injuries that held him back. And then the surprise transfer, yeah, I don't have one. Again, USC just doesn't use their tight ends enough for me to throw names out there and glorify them. Sorry.
No problem. All right. You've exhausted that one. Chris?
I didn't realize USC used tight ends, so I don't have any names. I'm going to pass.
Oh, jeez. Only Arledge.
We talked last week about, I mean, look, obviously Fred Davis was great. I think he was a wide receiver recruit, but highly recruited, takes off out of Ohio under cover of darkness so that the natives don't try to kidnap him and they burn their mattresses and all that stuff. So that was fantastic. We talked about Dominique Byrd. We talked about Alex Holmes last week. But really, it's been so long since USC even tried to do anything with their tight end that I'm boycotting tight end discussions until USC has a tight end that catches at least 40 balls.
Do you hear that, Lincoln Riley? You know, Lincoln probably watches the show, I would say, religiously on a weekly basis. Eric?
Yeah, Fred Davis, Dominique Byrd, and number 3, because I assume this will just hang out on YouTube or whatever, and people can watch it 3 years from now. Deuce Robinson's number 3 , right? Because they're who are you picking from at this point? So I'm going to go with him. I'm going to go with Deuce Robinson and let that hang out there for 5, 6, 10 years, and people can come back and see that I was right. The surprise is Jacob Rogers, who came in as a tight end and then moved to offensive line and was an All-American tackle for a national championship team for USC. So when in doubt at tight end at USC, pick an offensive lineman. The disappointment is Bryce Dixon for all. I mean, he showed plenty of talent, and the thought was he was going to be great. And then some knucklehead decisions off the field to take him out of the mix there.
Wow, knucklehead. Ouch.
Wow.
That's a nice
It's a family show.
It's a family show. That's right. I am going to go with Charles Young from Fresno, California, Edison High School, prep All-American, parade All-American, great prospect, well-known in those days in recruiting. I too will go with Fred Davis, Toledo, Ohio, Rogers High School. Chris beat me to the punch on the sneak him out at midnight. It was one of the old-fashioned ways of trying to get a recruit out of Ohio. Ohio's never forgiven USC for getting Gary Jeter, the defensive tackle that turned out to be an All-American. Woody Hayes was ready to commit suicide on that one. We'll talk about it later. For me also, there was another one that was pretty well hyped. Hobie Brenner from Fullerton, California, Fullerton High School. I thought he was a well-known player, and tight end, as we said, was a tough one. My surprise tight end recruit that actually turned out to be pretty good and even better in the NFL was Mark Boyer from Huntington Beach, California, Edison High School. Mark was actually a quarterback on a league championship team for Edison his junior year, and then was moved to tight end his senior year when Edison won the CIF title in 1979, and then went to play in the NFL for, I think it was about 9 years. One of his teams was the Indianapolis Colts, so he was a surprise. Again, you say, well, who didn't live up to the hype? In trying to go over some names here, I just came to the conclusion that Chris Barrett from Tustin, California, Tustin High School, they didn't know what to do with him. He was a tight end and he was a defensive lineman, but he just kind of faded away after a pretty highly well-known high school career. So for me, it was Chris Barrett.
Blake Ailes probably in that conversation too.
Yes, definitely. Blake Ailes, wonderful family. Blake Ailes. I met his father a number of times. Was a great guy. All right, let's wrap up the first half of the huddle here with offensive line recruits, and this is a tough one because the history of USC football, even in the world of recruiting, is avalanche of talent. So, Mark, who did you pick?
So Eric actually took my Jacob Rogers answer for the surprise because he came in as a tight end, but became an offensive lineman. Tyron Smith is going to jump right to the top of the list. You got Jeff Byers. These are all number one, offensive linemen in the state. And I think they performed at USC. And again, the list is so long, but again, I'm just going to go with another one. He came in and he started pretty much right away, Austin Jackson. So again, a lot of players to choose from. I don't know if anybody's going to get mentioned twice here. I mentioned my surprise was Jacob Rogers, but for the flip reason of what Erik brought up. And then as far as never living up to the hype, man.
I know you're going to get this. I know you're going to get this, Kulkin.
Oh,
I'd be disappointed if you don't get this one right.
so there is a wrong answer.
No, I don't think there's a wrong answer, but I'm kind of excited.
I'm going to be a little different. I'm going to put this here only because it wasn't his fault, and he kept being put out there to fail. And that's
Ooh.
Toa Lobendon.
Interesting. Good point. Actually, that's an interesting selection.
Mhm.
Kudos to you. Okay, Arledge, what do you got?
So Kulkin said some of my lived up to the hype names. I don't think he mentioned Winston Justice, so I'll go Winston Justice.
Did last
Long
week.
Beach. What's that?
I did last week, but for different reasons.
Yeah, don't. I mean, last week's in the past, man. So Winston Justice, big time recruit out of Long Beach Poly, one of the 5 Poly superstars, and started as a true freshman and had a great career. Never lived up to the hype. Thomas Herring, 5-star offensive tackle, #1 offensive tackle recruit in the country, I think. Never did anything at USC. I'm not even sure how long he stuck around. Under the radar, I'm going to go with Deuce Latui, junior college transfer, came in at about 390 pounds, slimmed down to be about a 340, 350 pound wrecking ball of an interior lineman, and really the key to that rushing attack in some of the early Pete Carroll teams.
Erik?
Yeah, I mean, Mark said that we wouldn't name the same guys a couple of times. Tyron Smith's the answer as the big time guy. Absolutely. Matt Khalil and Sam Baker were my other 2 guys that lived up to it. I think Elijah Vera Tucker deserves mention in there too for what he did. And then Chris was right. The disappointment. Thomas Herring was one of the first names that I filled in on this whole thing, regardless of position. He was a top 20 guy in the country when he came out, and just couldn't find a spot inside, outside, couldn't stay healthy at all, weight stuff, all of that. My surprises, I had 2, Ryan Khalil and Charles Brown. Both were 3-star guys. Charles Brown turned into an All-American left tackle and I think a 2nd-round pick of the Saints. And then Ryan Khalil was a star at USC and in the NFL.
Yeah, Ryan Khalil is an excellent choice. All right, I'm going to go with, again, I'm stretching it back to, the senior citizen card. Ron Yeri, Bellflower, California, Cerritos, JC, came in as a 2-way tackle, offensive tackle and defensive tackle. Was well-known, lived up to the hype coming out of community college. I'm going with Brad Buddy out of Kansas City, Missouri, Rockhurst High School. He was as decorated and way at the top of all the recruiting lists. Obviously he was the son of Ed Buddy from the Kansas City Chiefs. But Brad Buddy to me was absolutely unbelievable. When he came in as a freshman, the first time in practice, he was going up against seniors and he was pancaking them. And I remember, I think it was Jack Ward, the trainer, turned to me and said, "This kid is a different human being. He is a man." And he was. And as a college player, they don't get much better as a lineman. My 3rd pick was Tony Baselli from Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, Fairview High School. He lived up to his billing as one of the great tackles. And of course, we know that he has made it into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. My surprise recruit was actually became an All-America was Keith Van Horn from Fullerton, California, Fullerton High School. Better known also on the basketball court. But SC again was taking a lot of tight ends possibilities and moving them to tackle. And he lived it out, became a sensational lineman. My offensive recruit who never lived up to the hype, only one name came to mind for me, although the others were good choices too. Damian Mama from Moreno Valley, California, St. John Bosco High School. He was, without a doubt, big enough, strong enough, but it just didn't work for him. He played, but didn't live up to the billing. So with that, let's move to halftime. Difficult topic here. Using the same criteria as offense, give us your place kicker, punters. Erik, what do you got?
Oh yeah, no, I spent a ton of time on this. I for the kickers, I just did three that I liked that lived up to it. Tom Malone, Ryan Kulkin, and Andre Hidari. Actually, Hidari missed some kicks and the percentage wasn't great, but he had some big time makes too. And I think the one against Stanford kind of comes to mind. But Tom Malone came in. I think he was, a top 10 kicker in the country, and obviously did what he did. I don't know. Is there really, has USC brought in a kicker that everyone was absolutely fired up about and then didn't do anything? I don't. Oh, okay. Mark's got that. Go for it.
Wait. Did you give us your surprise?
No, that's it. I only stay positive about kickers. That's a superstitious bunch. You can't get down on it.
You have no kicker that didn't live up to the hype?
What hype? They're kickers.
Stop it, Erik. Don't have a meltdown on the show. It's embarrassing. All right, we'll defer now to Mr. Kulkin. What do you have, Mark?
I agree with Eric's list, but the guy who just didn't live up to the hype, it's got to be the 5-star, Troy Van Blarcom.
Wow.
How'd you miss that one, Erik? I mean, talk about.
I didn't have any hype for any kickers coming in. I assume that they're all head cases. It's a 50-50 shot at best if they're going to be any good. I mean, college kickers is a hashtag every week for a reason.
Wow, what an indictment.
Some of them are great. I just, you got to see them first. There's not a lot of hype for kickers for me until they're actually out there.
So yeah, you put Tom Malone on the list. You got, obviously, David Beeler was the surprise transfer. Chris talked about him last week. And you got to like any kicker who's wearing a neck roll. So, I mean, he belongs in there.
All right. Are you complete, Mark, on that one?
I'm good.
Okay. Chris?
I don't follow kicker recruiting, Greg. You got to be kidding me.
Well, don't put it all on my shoulders.
You think I'm going to On3 and checking out who the top kicking targets are every year? Come on.
I think you're very.
I'm not going to talk about this. The only thing I'll say is that, and he turned out to be a good punter. But we had the Aussie punter who, when he first shows up, all we hear about is how he's booting the ball 60 yards in practice. We think, wow, we got a real weapon there, a punter. He's killing it. 70-yard punts every day. And then the season starts and we're getting 34-yard fair catches every time. That was terrible.
Now, who was his coach, Chris? Who was the coach of him special teams at the time? Who was it?
Who was a special teams coach? Was Baxter around at the time? I don't remember.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, look, it's not. I'm sure it's not his fault. I'm sure he could have punted the ball 70 yards, but we chose to do what we did, and that was a sad era. So I don't want to talk about it. I'm just saying I don't follow kicker recruiting, and I'm not going to spend any more time talking about it now. I'm just not.
I like your determination on that, but I'm going to tell you my three were Tom Malone from Lake Elsinore, California, Temesco Canyon High School, John Stonehouse, punter from Pasadena, California, highly acclaimed out of Los Angeles Loyola High School, and I'm going with an LA City pick who got some big pub, Mario Danello. So that was my surprise kicker. I think it was Mark. Correct me if I'm wrong. David Beeler from Anaheim, California, Santa Ana JC. I thought he was a surprise to me that he came out of really nowhere and did what he did. And I don't know if this is a right answer. It might be the wrong answer, but for me, the guy that never lived up to the hype because it never stuck around was Parker Lewis from Phoenix, Arizona, Sowero High School. There was a lot of different comments about why Parker left, and a lot of it was, quote, internal from what I was told, and we'll just leave it at that. One thing I would like to say, because Chris brought it up and mentioned John Baxter, what a piece of work he was. I remember one time I walked up and asked him a question, a very simple question about his something about a punter. I don't know if it was the hang time or something. And he turned to me, he says, "What a stupid question." And, it's like one of those things that as a former coach myself, playing the role of the journalist, I'm sitting there going, wow, classless. And again, of course, we saw how his career ended up at USC.
Look, he doesn't like to talk about kickers either. He went to the Chris Arledge School of Coaching.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Is that right? I wasn't aware.
There were a lot of people on that staff that went to the Chris Arledge School of Coaching. They should have gone to a different school.
And on that note, let's kick off the second half of Inside the Trojans Huddle, turning the defense using the same formula. So we're going to start off with Chris Arledge. Name me your defensive linemen, 3 that were publicized and lived up to it. 1 that was surprised, that came out of nowhere, in your opinion, and lived up to it. And 1 that was like an extreme disappointment. So go right ahead.
So I'm not going to give 3. I'm just going to give 1. I'm going to be nice to the guys who go third because I know how sensitive they can be. But guy who lived up to the billing, Sean Cody, maybe the key recruit in Carroll's first class, everything, and lived up to the billing. Great player for a great defense. Unheralded, I could pick 2 of his teammates for this one. I'm going to pick 1 of the 2. I'm going to go Kenichi Udeze, who was probably a 3-star recruit, not real highly recruited, largely because he was probably 100 pounds overweight, but worked hard, slimmed down, and just became a monster. And I think led the nation in sacks his last year at USC. If not, he was close to it. Didn't live up to the hype. How about Jeff Schweiger? 5-star edge guy, was supposed to be an absolute monster. Never did anything at USC.
That was an excellent choice. Eric?
Jeff Schweiger was mine too. I'm tired of going after Chris. Sean Cody, again, it's number 1 for me. Cedric Ellis and Leonard Williams, the other 2 for me on the defensive line. My surprise, I split it with 2, and I think it's so I said Jarrell Casey and Tuli Pelotu. Tuli gets talked about a lot as a 3-star guy. He's a 4-star in some of them, but certainly not a slam dunk, this guy's going to lead the nation in sacks kind of recruit. And Jarrell Casey, I remember thinking, this guy can play. Why is he not, high rated? And I think he was a 4-star guy in some services. It's not like he was a walk-on, no star. Who is this guy? But not talked about as a big-time guy coming out of Poly for him. And then, yes, Jeff Schweiger is the slam dunk defensive line miss. I think it was maybe the first game of his career. He had a sack coming off the edge where he just swallowed a quarterback. And the thought was like, okay, there's a bunch more of those. And like you're talking about Kyle Prater stats, if he had another one, I don't remember it.
All right. Mark?
Yeah. So I'm going to go Darrell Russell. I'm going to go, you guys already mentioned the other 2 names, Big Cat and Sean Cody. Surprise. I'm going Lawan Ramsey. He was the other member of that defensive line. And then the guy who never lived up to the hype, I'm surprised neither one of you mentioned Manuel Wright.
Wow.
I mean, you take away that one defensive series against Cal in the Coliseum in 2004, he's most remembered for crying when Nick Saban got a hold of him at Miami.
All righty. Well, that's an interesting selection there. I'm going to go with my top 3. And probably I've got this out of order, to be honest with you. But I'm going to go with Leonard Williams from Daytona Beach, Florida, Mainland High School. Sean Cody, I already mentioned, out of Hacienda Heights, California, Los Altos High School. And Gary Jeter from Cleveland, Ohio, Cathedral Latin High School, which no longer exists. Gary Jeter, the Ohio Lineman of the Year at the height of the Woody Hayes rain for the Buckeyes. And oh my goodness, was Woody Hayes completely angry about this one. And John McKay couldn't have been more smiles. You would hear it at the cocktail circles about how McKay was so excited he snuck one out of Cleveland, Ohio. And the worst part about it, of course, is that Ohio State had to play against Gary Jeter in the Rose Bowl. And Jeter lived up to the hype. I remember our good colleague, Kevin Bruce, saying that Jeter was really, really tough. In fact, I met Gary Jeter on Loker Field, and I walked up to him and I kind of introduced myself at the time, and he shook my hand. And this guy I thought was going to collapse all the bones in my hand. He was so physical coming out of high school. It was like unbelievable. Nobody could be built like this and have that strength. My surprise recruit, really, I don't think is a surprise. I mean, I think there was other names that were much better than what I'm going to say. But I picked Tim Ryan from San Jose, California, Oak Grove. He was well known at some level, but I think maybe because he's from Northern California and maybe didn't get quite the acclaim down here, but I thought he was surprised. Now, there is no doubt in my mind, the recruit that never lived up to the hype, with all due respect, Kenny Bigelow from Elton, Maryland, Eastern Christian Academy. He never lived up to, Swigert was an excellent choice, but Bigelow, Manuel Wright was a good choice. At least he got on the field and made a big play that we all remember against Cal. But Kenny Bigelow, wow. Part of it was that he was hurt. Part of it was who knows why, but just didn't live up to that. So
Did he actually play for a real high school, or wasn't that part of the issue also?
there was some
You
issues.
know better than I on this situation. What was that whole David?
I remember Lane Kiffin took the quarterback there and said that he was coming out of 8th grade, that he was getting a scholarship, and Bigelow it was a whole family thing. I think it was orchestrated by the quarterback, the father, and it didn't seem like it worked out for any of them that came out here. All right, let's go to inside linebackers. Chris, who do you got?
By the way, I'm not going to leave defensive linemen without mentioning that another unheralded guy who turned out to be great, who didn't get mentioned, I'm surprised, Mike Patterson.
Yeah.
Unbelievable football player. He's about as good a nose guard as you're ever going to see in college football. And I don't think, obviously Coach O saw something in him, but this was not a guy who was as highly recruited as a lot of others. And he was a monster. Every bit as good as Udeze and Cody on that incredible defensive line. So
let me interject a second here, Chris. I think you made a really good point here. Ed Ogeron, SC's never had defensive line recruits since he left, at least quantity of them. Ogeron, of course, had his hand in Sean Cody. He had his hand in Leonard Williams. He was just a machine as a defensive line coach and a recruiter. And I think guys like that don't come along very often. So it's a good point on your part to bring him up. But who do you got for your linebackers?
All right. Again, I'm going to stick with my practice of just giving one name on the lived up to the hype to save everybody else. But I'm going to go with Chris Claiborne, who was a monster of a man out of Riverside, ends up starting as a true freshman. I think knocks Tasso Papadakis out of the starting lineup about 1 week into the season. Clearly lived up to the hype. Butkus Award winner, great football player on some pretty bad teams. Didn't live up to the hype. I'm going to actually go with another Chris Galippo, Servite High School, who had some serious back injuries and just didn't become the guy everybody expected him to be. I mean, he was, this was a 5-star recruit who was supposed to be dominant in the middle and just couldn't stay healthy enough to get it together. A guy that could get it together and came out of nowhere, Lofa Tatupu. Transfer out of, what was it, Maine? I don't think anybody knew what to expect of him. And what he became is an All-American and a guy who leads you to a national championship and a heck of a pro too. Very good in the NFL for a long time. Great player.
All right, Eric.
Yeah, Claiborne was my top guy there. Ray Maluga was a big time guy that came in and did a bunch of stuff for USC. And then Cameron Smith was a pretty highly recruited inside linebacker and played a ton of football, made a bunch of plays for USC. My surprise, I had Lofa there, but I put another name down because I knew that Chris was going to take all my answers for the entirety of this show. Kevin Ellison was a linebacker in high school and as a recruit, and then ended up playing safety at USC and obviously was a big time performer there. For the underperformed, I've got 2 5-star guys that just didn't really live up to it at USC. Josh Tatum and Luther Brown were both really big signings. Did not do a whole lot. Not to take everyone's name. Lamar Dawson was in there for me. I think
had to go one more.
I think he gets unfairly maligned a little bit. Again, he was a 3-star guy by some services. I mean, Lane Kiffin heaped way more than he needed to on him by making him a number 55 and putting that kind of spotlight on him. Again, that kind of turned him into this big time recruit. But again, a 3-star guy, we wouldn't be having any conversation about, you know, him being a number 55 or anything like that if he had worn, you know, 53 or 58 or whatever.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, that was for the reason why I had him in there, because he was given number 55. So top 3, everyone's mentioned these names already: Ray, Claiborne, Lofa. I'm just going to throw one more name in there as far as a surprise. Oscar Lua. I thought he played middle linebacker like USC fans want their middle linebacker to play. Just a tough as nails, stuff the middle, sacrifice his body over everything.
Good pick. All right. Do you have a failure? I hate to use the term failure, but
well, Erik mentioned, again, it's not a failure. It's just he didn't live up to the hype. When you see somebody wearing number 55 at USC, there's a lot of hype. So I put Lamar Dawson in there.
okay. Like everybody else, I picked Chris Claiborne, Riverside, California, JW North. That was my number 1. Number 2 was Richard Wood from Elizabeth, New Jersey, Jefferson High School. He was a big time recruit. Of course, he comes along in the days of parade All-America teams. And there was also a magazine that most people referred to called Coach Magazine, which had an All-America team. And if you looked at those two, you had a pretty good idea who were the cream of the crop, getting a lot of the recruiting pub. Number 3, I'm going to go with Clay Matthews from Kenilworth, Illinois, New Tier High School East. During that time period, he was well known, big time, received a lot of publicity, lived up to it. My surprise interior line recruit was I think Chris mentioned it, was Lofa Tatupu from Plainville, Massachusetts, transfer from Maine. I think the big allure at the time was, hey, that's Mosi Tatupu's son, and most of us didn't even say he had a son. But boy, what a surprise he turned out to be, right? Now, I am actually shocked that I did not hear this name as someone who didn't live up to the hype. And I'm going to blow the name, so I'm already guilty.
It's EA. Just call him EA.
EA. I'm going to attempt Pali Giotti. Okay. Yeah. From Las Vegas, Bishop Gorman. To me, wow, for someone so hyped, ended up going to Ohio State. I guess he played a few downs there, but given the whole hype thing, I can't think of anybody that's been more hyped that didn't live up to the expectations. All right, let's go to outside defensive ends or linebackers, depending on the set and the era they came through. So, Chris.
So I actually forgot about this category. And so instead of leaving the layups to later guys, I'm just going to choose the layups because it's all I can think of right now. Edge guy who lived up to the hype, Junior Seau. About as good a football player as you'll ever see, Junior Seau, and played in a way that was really fun to watch. you never knew where the guy was going to be, which I think could frustrate his coaches sometimes. You never knew where he was going to be. It just happened to be that he was in the right place the vast majority of the time, and there with a bad attitude. Great football player, unheralded, who became a star, also a layup. Clay Matthews. I mean, this is a guy who comes in as an undersized walk-on, and 3 years later he's 255 pounds and completely unblockable off the edge, and a great pro too. Guy who didn't live up to the hype. So I don't know that this is fair, and I don't know that it's even the right position, because he may have been categorized as an inside linebacker, but he came in with a lot of hype and he was given number 55, and I don't think ever lived up to it. I'm going to go with Marcus Steele. Junior college transfer in the Paul Hackett days, I believe. So it's probably not his fault that he didn't live up to the hype, but that's my third choice.
Okay, Eric.
I had Sao too as mine. Brian Cushing was one of mine as I think 5-star guy that came in there. I had a few for a third one. Willie McGinnis was up there. I think Keith Rivers deserves mention as a guy who played really well and did a lot of good stuff in that linebacker crew. I think he again doesn't get talked about as much as Ray and Cushing and those guys. He left a year before they did, but I think he's a guy that lived up to that. The surprise, yes, is Clay Matthews Jr., but I came prepared because I knew Chris would take mine. Morgan Breslin. Morgan Breslin played 18 games for USC. He had 17 and a half sacks and 27 and a half tackles for loss. I don't think people pen those stats in next to his name when he came in. The disappointment for me, and again, this I think speaks more to what recruiting hype and rankings and all of that can do to somebody, but Wally Batiku came in as a 5-star edge guy, and there was always a hope that, okay, he'll get the game and he'll figure it out, but just one of those things where you saw him in high school and saw what he looked like walking out of the field, and there were, you understood why people wanted him to come to that school and thought, okay, if he gets this, look out. Another guy I threw in there, Jabari Ruffin, was a big time recruit that kind of didn't do a ton on the field for USC.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, you should have just went with Jabari Ruffin. Stop taking my first choice. But yeah, Wole Batiku. I mean, we talked about him in the past. Well, I talked about him on my show. You talk about your prototypical, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. That's where that category comes from. And that's, again, Eric, he defined it perfectly. You look at him, you're like, whoa, monster. And he just never developed he was just stiff. He never developed. But the top guys, without a doubt, Junior, I'm going to throw Lojack, Lawrence Jackson in there, and then Brian Cushing. Clay Matthews is the layup surprise. I mean, he was the guy who came in with Brian Matthews genes and eventually developed.
All righty. My three were Junior Seau, Oceanside, California, Oceanside High School. William McGinnis received a ton of recruiting stuff from Long Beach, California, Long Beach Poly, deserving. My third one, again, I reached back to Parade Magazine and Coach Magazine. Tim Rosovich from Mountain View, California, St. Francis High School, just a complete animal. My surprise outside linebacker pick, although I think that in listening to you guys, I'd have to say I think you're more right than I am with Clay Matthews. Is it the third out of Gura High School, I think it was. But I did pick Dwayne Bickett. Dwayne Bickett, I had in my basketball league that I used to run. It was one of the first superstar basketball programs. It was played at Cal State LA. And Dwayne Bickett was all CIF in basketball as well as football. He was out of Glendale, California, Glendale High School. And he could have been outstanding in either sport. but that was a surprise that he became as good as he was and then went on to the NFL. My surprise of who didn't live up to the hype, I think, was more a product of the era, was Ron Brown from La Puente, California. Bishop Amat came in with a lot of hype, but just didn't work out for him. So that was kind of my choice right there. All right, let's move on to cornerback recruits, which I thought is a tough category. Chris?
By the way, I was waiting to see if somebody was going to choose a current player in the didn't live up to the hype off the edge category, but I guess we're gonna have to wait a year or two for that name to be put in here. It's nice to see that there's so much optimism in this group. All right, corners lived up to the hype. I mean, this is easy. It's Adoree Jackson. He was a big time recruit. Pulled him from halfway across the country. Starts as a true freshman and plays really well, about as well as you're going to see a corner play as a true freshman. Adoree did, and of course wins the Thorpe Award. Didn't live up to the hype. I'm gonna go with Isaac Taylor Stewart, a guy who was a big time recruit, speed to burn, and he played. That may be the problem that he played. I mean, on that team, just about everybody in that secondary was getting torched left and right. So, you could have picked one of his teammates too, but I'm going to go with him. And I didn't realize we're splitting up corners and safety. So the name I had for unheralded is actually a safety. So I'm not going to say it now. I'm going to wait a few minutes. And I can't think off the top of my head of an unheralded corner who played really well at USC. Although I'm sure, you know what? I'm gonna give it to him 2 weeks in a row. Greg Coet from the mid 1980s, who wasn't even supposed to play corner. He was a linebacker. They threw him out there and he hit people. And so I'm gonna go with Greg. Greg gets 2 mentions in a row.
All right, Eric.
Yeah, so corner Adoree is easy number one. Will Poole, I talked about him last week. He came over as a JC All-American when he transferred in to USC. My third, I was split a little bit. Kerry Harris was a 4-star guy, and I thought he did a lot of good stuff at USC. But I went with Mekhi Blackman, and that's 1 year, and that's recent history. When he came over from Colorado, there was a thought, okay, this guy's going to be the starter. And he's got to play well, and he played really well. My unheralded guy, I threw 2 down. Terrell Thomas was one of them for me. Ajani Harris, I actually ended up going with. Ajani Harris and Adoree Jackson both had 6 interceptions at USC. I know Adoree did far more offensively, but Ajani Harris was not a guy early on in his recruitment that you thought, that's going to be a guy that gets a USC scholarship offer, and that's going to be a guy that plays a lot at USC. And then the guy who kind of underperformed, Isaac Taylor Stewart's a good one. Elijah Griffin came in with him in that same class. They were both top 35 overall in the nation. Griffin was a 5-star guy. The name that popped out to me was TJ Bryant. I remember when he committed coming out to USC from Florida, it was another one of those, oh my gosh, Pete Carroll went into Florida and stole another one and just never developed at USC. I think he ended up at Troy by the end of his career. But again, the thought was that's a big recruiting win at corner. And again, Pete Carroll being a guy, he knows corners. He's gonna be right about that.
Mark, your selections?
Yeah, obviously Adoree. I'll go with Ron Lott. And for that third, I'm going with T2. I'm going Terrell Thomas. I thought he was really solid. And when you think about how many before Adoree, USC just didn't have highly drafted, cornerbacks that were highly drafted. And I think Terrell was the highest draft pick at the time for quite a while. As far as surprise, I'll go Nickel Roby, just because of his diminutive size. And then you guys have mentioned the other names. I'll throw out the other layup at cornerback. Chris Steele. I mean, that you brought up Isaac Taylor Stewart. Eric, you mentioned, oh gosh, name already just skipped my mind. But Chris Steele was the other guy in that group that, 5-star. Everyone expected him just to be the lockdown corner. It just never happened for whatever reason.
All right, well, I'll complete this category with my top three were Adoree Jackson, obviously, Bellevue, Illinois, Sarah High School. I went with Joey Browner from Atlanta, Georgia, Southwest High School. In those days, USC could go into Georgia, and they were plucking players out of Southwest High School. In fact, the Browner brothers, who originally came out of Ohio, obviously the most famous of them was Ross Browner, who recently, unfortunately, passed away. Ross Browner had said after his Notre Dame career, something along the lines that if I had to do over again, I'd go to USC and I would send my brothers to USC. And they did. He did. They came to USC. So that was, profitable forecast there. Also, Brian Kelly from Denver, Colorado, Overland High School. He was pretty well hyped. Unfortunately for Brian, most people will remember that he was the guy that dropped the ball against Florida State that could have been the difference in SC upsetting the Seminoles in the Coliseum. My surprise transfer pick, Will Poole, by way of Boston College JCs. Eric mentioned it. The guy who never lived up to the hype, in my opinion, was Elijah Griffin from Long Beach, California, Mission Viejo High School. All right, finishing up the second half, let's conclude with the safeties. Chris, who are the safeties?
Guy that lived up to the hype. By the way, USC safety tradition is unparalleled. So there are all kinds of guys that live up to the hype. The guy I'm going to pick, I'm going to do it because I owe him. Because when I was talking to Mark Carrier on my show some weeks ago, and I listed all of the great safeties that have played at USC, I forgot to mention his name, so I owe him one. Talanoa Hufanga, who was and is a fantastic football player, more than lived up to the hype. But on this front, you could name about 15 guys. So that's my one. Unheralded, easy. Troy Polamalu, 3-star recruit who becomes one of the top 3 safeties in history, along with along with Ronnie Lott and Ed Reed. So I think he had some injuries in high school that probably kept him from being a higher rated guy. But if you go from 3-star to the 3rd best of all time, that's pretty good. Didn't live up to the hype. I'm going to pick on the same secondary. I'm going to go with Isaiah Polamalu, who was a 4-star guy, not a 5-star guy, but I can't get out of my mind what I saw from that secondary every week that last year, where teams were scoring about 60 points and doing whatever they wanted. So I think he's earned his place on the list.
Okay, Eric, who's on your list?
Yeah, so for safety, at the top of my list, I have Taylor Mays up there for what he did at USC, coming out as a big time guy. Sua Cravens was number 2 for me. A big time recruit, ended up playing some linebacker, some safety, and stats in like every single defensive category for USC. My number 3 safety is a guy, and Pete Carroll said this about him during when he watched him play in spring practice. He said he didn't make any plays. He just looked like a nothing guy out there. That's from the LA Times. That is about safety Matt Grudegood, and is a big reason that he ended up not being safety Matt Grudegood and being linebacker Matt Grudegood. But he goes in as my number 3 safety recruit, who then moved up. The surprise, the unheralded guy is absolutely Troy Polamalu. I knew Chris would take it. I wrote a second one. It's another position switch guy. Uchenna Nwosu, as a recruit, was listed as a safety. He did a bunch at outside linebacker. That position that USC's been trying to make all these defensive linemen play not all that well. That spot was filled in by Uchenna Nwosu beautifully. He put up a ton of sacks and tackles for loss, interceptions, got his hands on stuff. He was phenomenal. The guy who was a bit of a disappointment for me, you look at the recruiting list, Taylor Mays is there as the number 2 safety in his class. Right behind him, number 3 safety in that class is Antoine Perez, who came all the way across the country, ended up going all the way back across the country after he got a load of Taylor Mays. But he was, I think, a top 15 guy in that class nationally, a big time talent, and just we didn't get to see it at USC out of him.
All right, Mark.
Taylor Mays, just because of what he could do on the field. Chris described him last week. I don't need to continue with it. Mac Rudiger is a safety. I don't care what Pete Carroll called him. He's a safety. He's a hybrid. So he's up there. And Mark Carrier, he deserves the top 3 list as well. Now, Troy Polamalu, there's no reason to even try and come up with a second name. And then the guy who never lived up to the hype, they took the number out of, mothballs to let him wear it. Darnell Bing.
All right. I can't believe that nobody mentioned this, but I guess it's somewhat maybe a confusion on the position. So my top 3 were Ronnie Lott from Rialto, California, Eisenhower High School. Fantastic, well publicized recruit coming out of there. In fact, I had Ronnie in my basketball league, and it was scary. It was like watching a linebacker on roller skates. And what a great guy. Belongs on this list, no doubt about it. Mark Carrier, Long Beach, California, Pauley High School, got the national awards. I debated on the third one, but when it all settled in, I just said, Dennis Thurman got a lot of pub and lived up to it from Santa Monica, California, Santa Monica High School. No need to talk about the surprise safety is Troy Polamalu, 10 Mile, Oregon, Douglas High School. And the safety that never lived up to the hype, this is a kind of a difficult one. I kind of went with Ipiani Hoholete from Los Alamitos, California, Los Alamitos. I don't think that he lived up to what my expectations were, considering all the positive publicity from him. But that happens. It just happens. All right. Let's wrap this thing up with some viewer questions and panel answers. Let's start off with Ricky in LA. Do you think the physicality by Michigan State we saw in USC men's basketball loss to the Spartans will also translate to playing football in the Big Ten? Any comments?
Yeah, of course it is. It's part of their style out there.
Well, here's the thing about that, right? So Michigan State basketball is not indicative of the entire conference. Michigan State basketball is an elite program that wins national championships and wins 20-25 games a season for 30 years, 20 years, whatever it is. So if you want to compare them to Michigan football, Ohio State football, yeah, those are big time programs that are really good. Purdue, Indiana, Maryland, Rutgers, those football programs, no, I don't. I don't expect some, team to roll out of those locker rooms and punch USC in the mouth. The talent is not comparable. But I mean, not to disagree with Mark, because yes, that the idea is we play in this conference and we're tough and we're going to do that. But college football across the country, you throw the ball, you try to put up points. All these teams are trying to do that. It's not a lot of 260-pound fullbacks in front of 220-pound running backs trying to get 3 yards on the ground anymore.
Ohio State is not playing Woody Hayes football anymore. I mean, they're spreading it out and chucking it all over the place, and they're the cream of that conference.
No, but also last year, if you remember, and again, it's not going to be every week, but there's going to be a higher percentage chance of weather games. And there was a game last year where CJ Stroud, he could have been standing in front of the barn and he would not have hit it. I think he was like 1 for 13 in the game, whatever the stat was. They had to go and start running the ball. because the wind was such a factor. So the question was, is it going to be a little bit more physical? Yes. And Michigan State, they've won one national championship in basketball. They get to the Final Four a lot, but they won one.
Well, I will say this, it will be more physical because there's more physical teams in the Big Ten. I don't think they're all, Superman along the line of scrimmage, but some teams are really tough along the line of scrimmage. They don't have the skill players that SC will have, but it's definitely going to be an elevation in physicality. All right, question 2 from Garrett in Dogtown, wherever Dogtown is. Do you think that this big USC recruiting weekend like we had just had this weekend is a good thing to put all your recruiting eggs in one basket?
For this, yeah, because it's unofficial. Those are all unofficial visits. So you do what you can to get those guys on campus as much as possible and get that kind of atmosphere going. And then you try to get them back for officials. But at this time of year, yeah, the names like that, guys like that, get them on campus as often as you can. This USC staff, the recruiting staff, this is not what it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago. This staff is equipped to handle this many guys on campus and put one-on-one FaceTime with those guys. Lincoln Riley knows how to put together a recruiting weekend, not differently than the last staff that was here.
Yeah, I think it was you, Eric. Someone mentioned that if SC does sign Deuce Robinson, based on that huge recruiting class they had at Lincoln Riley's home, the luau, whatever they were doing at that time period, if he signs, they'll have signed a large number of players that were at that particular festivity. I always look at the big recruiting weekends like this, who brought their parents? To me, if you brought your parents, you are serious, especially if you're coming from out of state, in terms of what it all means, because parents will click with other parents in that type of weekend, and it can be a real positive event. All right, question 3 from John 50 in Pasadena, California. When the expanded CFP begins in 2024, what's going to happen to the Rose Bowl?
Is it part of the rotation?
Yeah, it'll be part of the rotation. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear like the Rose Bowl is ever going to host a national championship game, which I think is kind of sad from a tradition standpoint. But it's going to be hosting, depending on what the exact format is. They'll probably get some semifinal games, I would imagine, maybe a quarterfinal game at some point. It depends on how the calendar goes. Yeah,
the Rose Bowl tradition was great, and when I was growing up, that was something that was hugely important to USC fans, all Pac-10 fans, all Big Ten fans. It's over. I didn't watch the Rose Bowl last year for the first time since I was probably 9 years old. I didn't even bother to watch it. The game just doesn't mean what it used to mean. That's the reality. And we, winning the Rose Bowl when there are other teams playing for the national championship in the playoff, it means you didn't make the cut. So what's going to happen to the Rose Bowl? What's already happened to the Rose Bowl? It's already lost its significance.
Yeah,
what the Rose Bowl will do.
Alabama and Oklahoma play, it was like, what is this?
I think the Rose Bowl will always be a bridge to college football tradition. I think when it's on television, there'll be a big emphasis on the tradition of college football and what is meant to college football. But I think this playoff thing, once it's really rolling, and I don't mean just 2024, but once it gets to 2028, 29, it'll be so in place by that time that the Rose Bowl will be a link to the past. But it will always be a big event because of the parade. It's just a natural thing, the parade in the morning, the Rose Bowl game in the afternoon. So,
but you see how much focus there is on the national champion now. Once we went to the BCS, really, and it was the whole season is not about winning your conference and winning your bowl game. It's about, can you be one of those final 2 teams? And now with the playoff, it's even more so. The Rose Bowl tried to hold out and got nothing. I mean, got steamrolled and nothing of what it wanted to join that rotation. And I think that tells you kind of all you need to know about how the decision makers in college football feel about whatever the Rose Bowl was trying to hold on to and represent. It's no, this is what we're doing now. You can get on board, or you could find a different sport to host.
Guys, I don't know. I think a lot of casual fans don't realize just how big this change to a 12-team playoff is going to be in college football, because it used to be that college football had the best regular season of all the major sports, and it wasn't close, right? Because one loss could ruin everything for you. And it also had the weakest postseason because some of the bowl games were fun and the Rose Bowl was meaningful. But at the end of it, all you'd have is a bunch of arguments. And once you go to 12 teams, Alabama's going to get in the playoff if Alabama has 3 or less losses, right? Yep. They are. And USC is going to get that. A USC team that loses in the Big Ten, who loses 2 games or less, will be in the playoff. The regular season is going to be substantially devalued, but that playoff is going to be amazing. And when you think about what it means to have in the regular season, if you show me a number 5 against number 12 game on a Saturday afternoon in the regular season, I'm watching that. It doesn't matter that it's not a playoff. If you're talking about having after the 4 byes or before the teams with the 4 byes even play, a weekend where you're having 5 against 12 and 6 against 11 and 7 against 10 and 8 against 9, that's an amazing lineup of football, right? That is 4 incredible games to move on to 4 incredible games the next week. That tournament is going to be mind-blowing, but it's going to dramatically change what college football is all about. And games where in the past, you know that you have to win this regular season game, otherwise all of your goals are gone. Think about the worst loss for me in USC regular season history, the 1988 number 1 versus number 2 game against Notre Dame. If that takes place in 2024, does the game matter? Yes, but does it matter like that? Not close. Both those teams are getting in. So everything is changing. It's not just the Rose Bowl, but the Rose Bowl's gone. What used to be no longer exists, except for the parade. Greg can watch the parade, but everybody else can be watching those other games.
You know where I was coming from, Chris, when I wrote that story about, there's going to be a point where teams are going to say, you know what, we're number 13. We didn't make the playoffs. It's kind of like the NIT now. The Rose Bowl will become the NIT. And you're going to have teams saying, you know what, if we're not playing for the championship, we're not going to degrade ourselves and go play in a game that doesn't matter at all.
North Carolina basketball can't play in the Rose Bowl.
They can play in the NCAA tournament. They chose not to go to the NIT. UCLA did the same thing years ago. They chose not to go to the NIT.
Well, I think an important point about the Rose Bowl, the Rose Bowl will be part, right, of the playoffs. Am I wrong?
We'll find out. They're going to be part of there'll be a location to play a game.
Well, as long as they're part of the process of heading towards the national championship, I think it does have meaning.
Well, the first round is homeschool, right? The higher seeded team will play. So the Rose Bowl is never going to host a first round game. And then from there, I think it'll be the same kind of thing, right? The Big Six will host the semifinals, and then I'm sure the final is going to go permanently to NFL stadiums and that sort of thing.
Right.
Rose Bowl itself anymore. There's no Big Ten champion versus Pac whatever champion. That's
all
gone.
right. Final question from David in Seal Beach, California. This could take 20 minutes, but try to keep your answers abbreviated if you would, please. If USC doesn't win the Pac-12 with Caleb Williams this upcoming season, how will that affect Lincoln Riley's program?
I mean, it depends, right? There's a whole rainbow of finishes that you can have that don't win the Pac-12. I mean, are you a last-second field goal in the Pac-12 championship game away from it? Did you lose 6 games? Did you lose 4 out of your last 6 regular season games against all those big teams? I mean, that without knowing kind of how that played out. It's tough, but ultimately, you're going to keep moving forward. I mean, Lincoln Riley's in this for the long haul. Like, he's going to be the coach. You do as much positive as you can in this year, and you move forward. He's going to recruit well. He's going to get a quarterback, and you're going to move on. Teams want to see defensively USC play better, and that's going to be, I think, the biggest thing. You can win the Pac-12 and be a dumpster fire on defense, and it'll hurt you more than, I think, if you don't win the Pac-12, but you button that up and you play really solid football all year long.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, look, the schedule, the second half of the year, the schedule is going to be just brutal. And getting through that without losing a couple of games is going to be hard. Even for a really good football team, that would be hard. You don't want to waste Caleb Williams last year at USC. He's going to be incredible. That offense is going to be incredible, unless there are a huge number of injuries up front. It's going to be an amazing offense. So you don't want to waste that. At the same time, you don't look at it and say, well, once Caleb Williams is gone, Lincoln Riley teams won't be able to score any points. I mean, they're going to be able to score points. They're going to score 46 a game with Caleb Williams, and maybe the next year they'll score 41. But I mean, his teams are always going to be able to score points. And so it's not like failing to win the conference title this year means that he's lost his one chance at glory. That doesn't make any sense. But you'd hate to see it happen, because the offense is going to be so good that if you can just get decent defensive play, you have a chance to have a really special season.
Yeah, that's the key point. I think they want to see if Lincoln Riley has growth on the coaching side with the defensive side of the ball. If that's showing a development, I think everything else will take care of itself as far as perception is concerned.
Yep, I think all very good points. But again, this is a question that could go on for a longer topic. But that being said, that wraps it up for us. If you have a question or comments for our panel, go to either of the WeAreSC message boards, click on the thread that pertains to Inside the Trojans Huddle, viewer or listener questions. That does it for us. Until next Tuesday, a big thank you again to our excellent panelists, Marc Kulkin, Erik McKinney, and Chris Arledge, and a special thank you to all of you for listening to or watching Inside the Trojans Huddle. Have yourself a great week. This is your moderator, Greg Katz, saying, fight on, everybody.